Scott McLeod, my brother. What's up? Hey. Lovely to meet you all. Lovely to be here with y'all. Um, so, wow, what have been some experiences? First of all, I am thankful to be in this space with all of you who are like doing the work, wherever corner of the world you are doing it. And my sister Katie, I love you so much, and just always pushing me and pushing the world and pushing your own practice. And I always have loved you, and I appreciate you inviting me to be in this space with you. Um, Impactful experiences. I might name three things. So I'll tell you three quick stories. So one is I used to be a PhD kid over the University of California, studying social mobility, poverty, and education. And I had my old football coach say to me, who was a superintendent as well, he's like, do you want to like write about these problems, or do you want to like do something about them? And yeah, it was kind of dropped the gauntlet on me. And it like really said, okay, let's get out of my head and out of like just the writing about things to getting like into the work with communities, with people. And so I left. My mother was not very happy about this. It was an $80,000 fellowship, and she just like lost her mind that I left this program to become a teacher for $32,000 a year. But I did that, and I worked in Moreno Valley, which is kind of like east of Los Angeles by about 2 hours, and about 2 hours north of San Diego's inland, and largely lower socioeconomic community. But I left that world of reading about and talking about things to trying to do the work in communities. That was a big shift for me, because I think two things happened. One is these were largely Black and brown and poor communities. They were all getting very, very high test scores, but no one was paying attention to the implications of what it does to the soul to constantly churn out high test scores at the detriment of joy, at the detriment of purpose and of possibility thinking. And frankly, in that experience, the education in that model was all about like making it teacher proof. It was this whole idea of, it was all research based, by the way. It was like guaranteed and viable curriculum. No matter where you go, you're going to get this same experience no matter what. I was like, oh, well, that's gross. So in my class, I would lie to my principal and tell half truths. And then I would like take my kids out and do like cool things with them in the world. One example was we raised like $30,000 every year for like 3 to 4 years to take these Black and brown kids to a joint called Big Rock Creek. It was a camping experience for 5 days. And in this experience, young people could like canoe, could kayak, horseback riding. One little girl she just went to the trees and she would smell the vanilla pine trees. She was like, Kaleb, Mr. Rashad, what are you supposed to do when we get there? Just be a kid. Go and explore things together. And then let's talk about it. I got in a lot of trouble there in that school system. And they were not about that at all. That's one experience. I think the second experience was like going to work for a very affluent community here in San Diego, north of me here in a place called Poway Unified. It was like mostly rich white kids and with a sprinkle of others. And in that place, like it was all about like creativity, innovation, and like whatever the kids want to learn, let's see if we can follow them. I was like, well, how come they're not doing that for Black and brown kids? So in that community, there was this really strong community push around like jobs of the future, about creativity and innovation. And our kids are like, they're curious, and Black and brown kids curious too. They got dreams. In that space, what was transformative for me was John Collins, the former superintendent, had this mantra: change the way we do school. And we had an opportunity to create a new school. Me and my mentor and sister, Sister Sonia Risley, we helped to create a brand new school called Design 39. In the course of doing that, we had a chance to visit schools like all across the country. And I was like, oh my God, like, look at what young people can do. So we visited High Tech High, yeah. We visited the Nueva School up in San Francisco, the Henry Ford Learning Institute up in Detroit, Michigan, the Corpus Christi schools in Corpus Christi, Texas. We visited the Mount Vernon Institute for Innovation in Atlanta, like all these really rich like experiences. And I was like, oh, whoa, that is what young, given the right conditions, this is what young people can do. That was part 2. Here's a third story about a significant experience. I think a third story would be about how I realized that, one, test scores and getting high test scores in school is not going to save Black and brown and poor people in this country. That's, I think, one lesson from the story. There's several other learnings, I think. The second is, if affluent communities can have beautiful facilities and can have learner-centric, student-centered experiences that are about their questions, their curiosities, their like tastes and the things that they want to do, Black and brown kids can do that too. And then there was a third story, I think, was when I went to New Orleans. And this time I was going to New Orleans. One of my roles is I'm the creative director at the Center for Love and Justice. And part of what we do there is we create new schools all across the country in 20+ priority cities. And we redesign existing schools. Part of one of the experiences that we engage in with these people from across the country, they might live in Denver, Colorado, they might live in New Orleans, they might live in ATL, New York, or some other places, Oakland, Texas, wherever they might be. Most of these are women of color who are just fed up with their community schools and they want to do something different radically. And so we invite all these new school creation fellows to go visit schools, just like I did, all around the country. So we might go to the hip hop school in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or in this case, we went to New Orleans. And the story I would like to share is like how learning happens outside of the school walls. But we don't always like count it as learning. And so it was about 4 years ago now, we visited New Orleans and we had this sort of social justice ecosystem as a theme. And in this theme, we took 25, 30 new school creation fellows to visit New Orleans to not just see schools, but to see what does learning look like in a community. So we visited joints like Grow Dat Youth Farms, which is a social justice youth farm system. They literally grow 20,000 pounds of food. You're talking about chemistry, biology, flora, fauna. You're talking about like really rich scientific learning, rigorous learning that like has a contribution to the world. So we went to visit Grow Dat Youth Farms. A second place we visited in New Orleans was Liberty Kitchen. Oh my God, Liberty Kitchen. Liberty Kitchen is located right across the street from Juvenile Hall. You know what they do there is they recruit young people from the Juvenile Detention Center and teach them skills in the restaurant business, including how to be a chef. Another place we visited while we were there was the Whitney Plantation. Another place that we visited while we were there was Giacomo's, which is a restaurant on the, so anyway, my point is like, there's so much learning that is not confined by the walls. Yeah. So my third story I would share with you is about, and it might be a provocation too, why does learning have to be confined by the walls of the school?
So Kaleb, that's what I want to kind of get into with you, is I think that you hit on some really critical points. And I love those experiences from like the PhD you to getting into some of these different schools, not only as an educator, but as a leader. And you've hit on so many of the things that we've talked about that are challenges, the curriculum, the confinements, the way we do school, that don't always honor and allow each young person to tap into their passions, to do things that matter to them, but to really learn. And I love this last story around New Orleans and learning beyond the classroom walls, honoring that. I know we have a lot of people who are here today who have been doing that work and really thinking about it. But when we think about creating the conditions, and this is a lot of the work that you've done at High Tech High and some of these schools that you've mentioned, we talk about designing the future rather than just like implementing the plan. Here's the plan, I'm going to follow it. But we're really looking to design the future. And, you know, we spent last week with you at Design Camp, engaging with educators and thinking about how to design the future that we want. Can you talk a little bit about human-centered design and why that matters so much for our schools today? Why being able to empathize and look beyond our own experiences to really design for those we're serving? Like, why does that matter?
So you want me to talk about design?
I want you to talk about design. I'm just teeing
Oh
you
my
up.
gosh. Okay. Okay. So let me just like scope out for a quick sec. One is I was a teacher. I was a principal. I was a director of some of our schools here at High Tech High. I am now serving in this sort of interim capacity. I like to call myself the second string CEO. My work, I like things that work. I love big dreams. I love all those things, but I need tools that help move people. So let me just say that first. I think second then is one of the signature experiences that really like supported me a lot was spending time at the Stanford D School. It was like in the middle of my journey. Remember, first it was like all about like getting in, like, let's make sure the kids get the standards and then they'll be fine. But I learned that was not the case. And then it was about creativity and innovation. And I've learned that that's also inadequate. But then there was this question about like seeking liberatory learning experiences. So let me back up to that middle spot about creativity and innovation, because it was a really significant spot for me. Going to the Stanford D School, like, I was like, oh, yeah. Because I felt like, oh, we don't just have to follow the mold. You got to remember, there are certain kind of phenotypes that are attracted to education. They're generally risk averse. They generally like follow what everybody else does. And trying to like venture out on your own in that space can be very challenging. So the Stanford D School like helped me like unlock my own sort of creative mojo, supported me with how to unlock the creative mojo in others and within communities. Like, that's a big deal. I think people love having an opportunity for their ideas to be heard, their pains to be surfaced, to like figure out what are we going to do because of it. Like, that whole middle part of my journey helped me combine two things: design with equity. And where equity can sometimes be all about like identity and democracy and liberation, which sounds great, you're not always sure about how to mobilize those things. Design is a mobilizer. And so equity, with an equity lens and design combined together, it supports individuals and communities with engaging in substantive questions about who are we, why do we do these things, why do we do these things this way, what is our aspiration as a community, and then what are ways we can move forward in that direction together. I think one of the great challenges that we typically face is we want someone to just tell us the practices. And then we just replicate the practice without really interrogating the underlying assumptions of school, right, or the underlying principles that might amplify. Think of it as like the old iceberg theory, right? You see the practices at the top, but if you never really interrogate the things at the bottom, you're going to just, replicate what others have done without any forethought. So to me, I think part of what I've appreciated about design is kind of old school Paulo Freire. It's not just like what you're doing onto the system, but it's also what you're unleashing within yourself.
And others, right? Because
And
you're
others.
allowing, and that's what I love about design too, is you can go through the process and have those constraints that help people kind of move through the process. But what emerges so often are the amazing and beautiful ideas that everyone has underneath that they don't often say. But in this process, you're like, what if we did this? What if we did that? And then you get new and better ideas that actually serve the context and the system so much better.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, people tell you all the time, I have the worst ideas always, but that's okay because the process helps us. And it also helps to unlock us, right? If I throw out the worst idea first, it's only going to go up from there, right? And so, but that humility that you can like express in that space comes from a transference of power. And that's what great design does. It doesn't like mean you're hoarding the power yourself, so I get to do whatever I want to do. It's the community is walking into its own democratic agency. Like that's like beautiful. The thing.
Yeah. And then they own it, right? Then it's something that is shared and owned. So I want to kind of follow up on this a little bit. In chapter 11, we talk about navigating change, right? So moving from designing the future to really navigating change. And the pandemic, of course, has opened our eyes to many practices that don't work, but also many practices that can work in new and better ways. So I'm wondering, what are some things you're dreaming up? What are you imagining as possibilities for the future of education? We only have a few minutes, but I do.
Gosh,
I want to create space.
Jeez. Okay. So, because I know we have to have a Q&A here. So I'll name these.
So be thinking about your questions while he's dreaming up the future, thinking about some questions you have.
I had a really good friend of mine who's been doing this work longer than me. He's probably 20 years my senior. Share like a really powerful construct that helped me really think about creating new schools and the redesign of existing schools. It was practices, principles, and structures, or principles, practices, and structures. So principles are about the values that we hold. The practices are the things we do. And the structure holds the space and time for those things to happen. And what most people do is spend time in the practice part, but never really think about the structures that hold those practices or the principles that really undergird it. And so what I would suggest, first off, is design for now. The future is what we're sitting in the moment. Mm-hmm. And what I would share is this, if I can drop this in the chat, let's see if I can do that. Maybe Naomi, you can drop this in the chat. But this is a set, I just dropped it in the chat, Naomi, if you could share that with everyone. It's principles. So instead of thinking about the practices, what principles might create the enabling conditions that allow folks to own practices, own the structures that allow innovative, creative, justice-centric sort of experiences to happen. So if I were to name two things that I'm thinking about a lot, one is in this current context, I think there is a broader movement to decentralize, to have decentralized, autonomous, semi-autonomous sort of like learning experiences that aren't confined by ages, that isn't confined by preconceived notions of like knowledge, or that's confined by perceived academic ability. So I say that to say, a thing I'm hoping for in this space, in my current context, is that a small group of students, let's say 50 to 60 kids, with maybe 2 adults, maybe 2.5 adults with some, support, are able to like use the school as a place where they meet. And not necessarily the place where the learning happens. In fact, a push might be to think about, how is learning happening outside of the school walls, cross age, across discipline, across perceived academic ability, where young people get a chance to be in the world, learn with the world, and learn how to contribute to the world. That's happening already, by the way. So that's not like novel. It just may not be happening widespread in many communities. So I think that's one thing I think about within my current context.
Mhm.
I think the other is to like hit on this sort of decentralized piece again, sort of like with blockchain, is a way of like decentralizing, because just if I'm just being straight up with you, like I am not very sure that Black and brown and poor people in this country can get the education that they need. You look around about what's happening in this country. We've got 30 plus states that have enacted some sort of like restrictive policy about what you can read, talk about, think about, explore in terms of race, gender. Like, yo, that's happening right now on our watch. It's happening on my watch. I'm here too. I'm with you. So I'm reminded by my brother, Steve Bilko. Y'all know this quote right here? You cannot suppress a people with just military might alone, but you can school them into their right, proper position in a social order that is a quasi-caste racialized system in this country. So I am not sure that Black, I'm gonna speak for me, Black folks in this country, Indigenous folks perhaps, Latinx, other ethnic communities can like get the sort of education they need. And I'm talking about that deep kind of education. So to me, I think, and this is something that's already happening, there are communities that are using the blockchain right now to decentralize credentialing. That is using the blockchain to decentralize learning. That's using the blockchain to decentralize funding. So we don't have to depend on the good intentions of the United States government or your state Department of Education in order to educate our children the way they need to be educated. So to me, I think there's two. There's a sort of institutional sort of response, like how are you like pushing on the institution from the ideology and pedagogy to practice? And then I think the second is extra institutional. It's the sacred work. It's the sacred work of ancestors who've paid the price so that people like me can be here. And we can't go around asking permission, not in this country.
So Kaleb, there's a question just came in. So I love the ideas, decentralizing, really thinking about, we talk a lot about school centered. We do a lot that is based on an industrial model that is based on standardization. And if we really want to create opportunities for all people to get what they need, it really is about moving beyond the school system, really about, I love, the blockchain or badges, thinking about how to really identify what people know and can do beyond a school system. So there's a question from Ed Ingman. I'm wondering Hi, Ed. I'm wondering what steps you think that majority Black and brown schools can do to implement more learner-centered learning environments now. There are many bureaucratic barriers, but wondering what small wins we can achieve now and then into the future.
Yeah, great question. I think I'm gonna like name a couple of things that you might be able to latch on to, Ed, and others might be able to latch on to. So there's multiple ways to get to this. And then I can also give you some resources that might support you on your journey too. Maybe I might start with the resources first. So one is a book called Change Leadership by Tony Wagner. That body of work has really helped me as like, just frankly, a how-to manual to support transformational schools. That book singularly has helped me tremendously. But if I were to like try to like approach this question from an empirical point of view, from experiences that I've engaged in, I might say one is there's a broader thing here that's about experience, reflection, and dialogue. Like that's praxis.
Mhm.
That is a way people can begin changing their points of view. What does not work? Data, just student stories or a persuasive argument. All those things have been tried for like a long, long time. What does work is experience, meaningful experiences with adults in learning that matters to them, and then unpacking that. That helps. I think another thing that helps is to be clear about the history of school. What is it that was in the waters of this American school when it was formed? What were the underlying assumptions? What were some of the things that were happening in 1893 when it comes to the social, political, economic environment that the school was created in? Interrogating these things, and specifically interrogating the principles, the beliefs of the school system at the time, you will find that, I mean, there's a lot of things you'll find, but in this country in particular, I'm not sure how broad our audience is, but in that period, we had like mass lynchings of Black people, Birth of a Nation being previewed in the White House, English only. You had, it was right on the heels of, it was at the time of the Industrial Revolution, which was also coupled to slavery by its second name, convict leasing, which powered a lot of the industrial movement. There were lots of these sort of forces that were, I mean, also eugenics. I mean, so you had like science, church, I mean, you had the whole thing that was like powering what school looked like. So I think it's important to support the adults in learning together. What has helped me, and I would name this as the last thing for now, is a sort of have a sort of trajectory for the adults, whether we're talking about the adults in the school or the adults in the community. One is, how do you activate and explore, ideas as a community of adults? Second, how do you make sense of what you are learning and exploring together? Third, how do you integrate what you have learned? That continuum, coupled with practices, really supports adults in experiences together, unpacking those experiences, and taking meaningful action moving forward. Activation, exploration,
Integration.
Making sense of those things together, and then finally integration. So organizing and integration. So what do we do with that now?
Yeah.
And when you do that together, it doesn't take one person saying you should do this because of this. The group decides. Ooh, that's power.
It is. And Kaleb, what you just said is that whole piece so beautifully that, you know, we've talked a lot about in the last couple of weeks, our experiences. That's why I started with, what are your experiences? Because until we interrogate what we have experienced and what we know to be our normal, true experience of school, we can't really unpack why we do the things we do and really understand. They're so ingrained. The apprenticeship of the teacher by Lordy, right? It's like it's so ingrained that we do school this way. And, you know, a lot of teachers have said to me, well, but it works for me. I made it fine, but we have to also understand who is not being served, right?
Yeah.
If it works for you, who are our systems currently not serving? And what you just said is interrogating that, understanding that, and collectively figuring out what are the better steps. And if we don't do this with our kids and our students, we're missing out.
One of the best resources I've used, particularly, it's a little bit more challenging in like more affluent communities, because they like sometimes think, well, we already got high test scores. Why invest in creativity, innovation, or anything about justice? In other communities, what I've seen has been really helpful is something called the Opportunity Atlas. If you've seen this work before, just Google it, Opportunity Atlas. It is a dynamic, it's a online interactive tool created by Brown University and the US Census Bureau. And what it does is shows the extent to which communities are able to transgress out of poverty. You can search street by street in your own community. You see that? I see some of you looking around on it, you can like manipulate the variables to like say, I'm curious about Latinx females from this age to that age during this time period on these streets in this community. And you can see like to what extent are we actually, I mean, we can like run around chasing opportunity, institutionalized numbers, but as our kids are leaving us as neighbors, what are they doing? Where are they now? And how can this help us understand our larger impact?
So good. We have so many resources now that people can access, and we will share those out. We are going to jump into some breakout rooms. I want to go back to what you said, Kaleb, about this opportunity to create experiences for adults. We are so aligned here, right? If we don't create experiences for adults that fundamentally change what they know about learning and what's possible in our education system and what we still need to push on, we're constantly having to push on the status quo, right? That's this idea of what school is, the grammar of school. And if we don't push on that to actually meet the needs of our kids, we aren't going to be able to create that new and better system. So we have some breakout rooms right now that are designed for addressing these questions. And I believe Kelsey has 3 different rooms that they're going to open up, and you can choose which room speaks to you. Like we've done in previous sessions, if you don't have time to be in a breakout room, you can drop. We appreciate you and thank you. And if you want a further discussion with colleagues around the country and world, we're going to open up those rooms for you in just a moment.
Great. And as we're opening those up, I'll just call them out loud. First, Kaleb, thank you so much for being here. Group number 1 is next steps on enabling conditions. Group 2 is involving stakeholders and community. And group 3 is getting started, building that action plan.